It begins quietly. That's the part no one tells you. Not with a crisis, not with a dramatic collapse, not with blood or fire or public disgrace. No, most men don't fall loudly. They dissolve silently. Into couches, into routines, into soft rituals of self-abandonment. You wake up each day and do what you did yesterday. You tell yourself it's fine. You tell yourself it's stability. But deep down, you feel it. That hum of dullness. That slow erosion of meaning. That quiet grief you can't name. And over time, something inside you begins to rot. Not because of pain, but because of comfort. Because nothing is challenging you anymore. Because everything is okay. Marcus Aurelius saw this long before our modern distractions, long before the infinite scroll, the dopamine loop, the curated dopamine farms we call lives. He wasn't warning men about external threats. He wasn't concerned with armies, emperors, or public humiliation. He was concerned with the death that happens while you're still breathing. He understood something most men still don't. That a man can go his entire life being praised, promoted, well-fed, well-liked, and still die utterly, profoundly worthless. Not because he failed, but because he never truly lived, never truly saw, never truly chose. The tragedy isn't failure, the tragedy is comfort that costs you your edge. The tragedy is survival that robs you of purpose. Tell yourself you're doing the right thing. You've got a job. You pay your bills. You avoid chaos. You behave. And the world rewards you for that. It calls you responsible, mature, dependable. But deep down, you know that those words are often just euphemisms for tamed. You've been taught that the goal of life is peace. But peace without principle is just sedation, and sedation is not the same as fulfillment. A dog sedated on the floor is peaceful. But is he free? Marcus didn't write Meditations as a work of philosophy for others. He wrote it as a reminder to himself. Because he knew the seduction of power, the hypnosis of praise, the illusion of virtue that comes from simply being busy. He wrote things like, you could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do, say, and think. Not as poetry, but as warning. Because even an emperor, surrounded by the best of everything, was haunted by how easy it is to waste a life. And if he had to remind himself, what makes you think you're exempt? You sit there scrolling, thinking you're just relaxing, thinking this is your time to unwind. You joke that it's harmless, but it's not harmless. It's soul corrosion. It's the slow death of your inner fire, disguised as leisure. It's hours of your life you'll never get back, spent feeding algorithms that only grow stronger the weaker you become. You don't need a war to become a casualty, you just need enough pleasure, enough distraction, enough reasons not to feel the hunger in your chest. And so you silence the ache. You call it adulting, you call it balance. But deep down you know that you're lying. Marcus said a man's worth is no greater than the worth of his ambitions. But what do you aim at? What vision keeps you upright in storms? Most men don't have an answer. They think about success in abstract terms, money, sex, admiration. But those are shadows, echoes of something real, distorted by ego. You were not made to chase attention. You were not made to become a better consumer, a better performer, a better image of manhood someone else taught you. You were made for the thing inside you that still whispers late at night, when everything's quiet, when there's no one left to impress. And that voice isn't screaming for comfort, it's begging for confrontation.
The hard truth is, most men will die never having found that voice. They'll spend their lives orbiting jobs they don't love, relationships that don't deepen them, goals that never really belonged to them. They'll laugh at things they don't find funny, say yes to things that feel wrong, agree with people who drain them just to avoid confrontation, conflict, or worse, solitude. They will exchange their essence for acceptance. And the world will never warn them, it will only applaud. Because the world doesn't care if you're free, it cares if you're manageable. And this is what makes the modern illusion so effective. You're told you're empowered, told you're evolving, told you have more opportunities than ever. But your soul is starving. You look around and see men breaking, quietly, silently, not from poverty, but from lack of presence, from the weight of a life that asks nothing meaningful of them. You see men who once burned with potential now numb themselves with whatever's easiest: pills, porn, performance, always performing. Even their vulnerability is curated. Even their honesty has a filter. And behind every one of those layers, there's a boy who never learned to carry his own soul. Marcus Aurelius wasn't warning about the collapse of empires. He was warning about the collapse of self. About the moment you stop living intentionally. About the moment you trade your will for someone else's rhythm. And that moment, if you're not paying attention, becomes your life. It becomes the structure that contains you, defines you, and finally buries you. Not in the ground, but in yourself. The worst part is, you won't even know this, because you'll be comfortable. You'll be entertained. You'll be praised. You'll be everything the world wants you to be, except real.
And maybe that's what terrifies you most. The possibility that the world doesn't actually want you awake. It wants you tame, predictable, pacified. A man who doesn't ask dangerous questions. A man who doesn't disturb the peace. A man who calls numbing, balance, and sedation self-care. Marcus Aurelius lived in a world of decadence, surrounded by men who wore robes of virtue, but lived like slaves. Slaves to appetite, slaves to reputation, slaves to fear. He understood that discipline wasn't about punishment. It was about remembering. Remembering who you were before the world started offering you easier options. Because the modern man, for all his cleverness, has forgotten how to suffer well. He avoids hardship like it's a disease, when in truth, it is the very forge of his transformation. He numbs his discomfort instead of investigating it, and so the edge of his soul becomes dull. He becomes someone who says things like, "I'm just trying to survive," not realizing the survival without purpose is just a slower form of death. Marcus didn't write from survival. He wrote from vigilance, because he knew that even as emperor, the drift into mediocrity was always one small compromise away. You feel it too, don't you? That creeping sense of having become ornamental in your own life. You say you're busy, but your days pass like copies. You say you're working hard, but you're not building anything sacred. You say you're okay, but you don't remember the last time you felt fully alive. Most men don't collapse from catastrophe. They collapse from the weight of 1,000 unremarkable days, stacked atop each other like tombstones for a life they were too distracted to notice ending. You wear a smile. You say you're fine, but at night something cracks. That feeling in your chest that says you were meant for more than this. And you were. But more doesn't come from having more, it comes from becoming more. Not through affirmation, not through applause, but through fire. Through the decision to stop performing and start living. Marcus didn't hand you a motivational speech, he handed you a mirror. And what you see in it might ruin your illusions, but it might also save your soul. He said, if it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. And how often do you betray that wisdom? How often do you nod when you should challenge, agree when you should confront, laugh when you should walk away? How many lies have you swallowed just to keep the peace, not realizing that every time you do, you train yourself to forget who you are? This is what comfort does. It doesn't just numb your body, it rewires your identity. It convinces you that the quiet death is acceptable, as long as it's well lit and air conditioned. So many men are asleep at the wheel of their own becoming, drifting, floating, calling it freedom. But Marcus would ask you, freedom from what? If you're not bound by discipline, you are bound by compulsion. And most men today are drowning in compulsions. Not because they're evil, but because they're untrained, unmentored, unfathered. And the world rewards that passivity. It tells you to just be yourself, but never asks,
if you've actually found yourself. It tells you to follow your heart, but never tells you that an undisciplined heart will drag you straight to ruin. You've been told that masculinity is dangerous, and it is, but not in the way they think. It's dangerous to lies, dangerous to weakness, dangerous to systems built on men being soft, addicted, and unsure of themselves. That's why the kind of man Marcus wrote for, the one who sharpens himself daily, who questions his comfort, who trains his mind like a soldier, has always been a threat to the status quo. Because a man who remembers himself cannot be manipulated. He cannot be bought. He cannot be flattered into obedience. He becomes a sovereign force. And that kind of man is rare, not because it's impossible, but because it's inconvenient. You want a meaningful life, but you want it without discomfort. You want to be respected, but without sacrifice. You want to feel proud, but without ever facing your shadow. Marcus knew better. He didn't romanticize virtue. He didn't drape it in flowery words. He said it plainly. Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. And that commandment burns through the centuries like a sword. Not a suggestion, not a slogan, a challenge. One most men will avoid because it demands that they stop blaming, stop waiting, and start becoming. The truth is, you already know what's wrong. You don't need another self-help book. You don't need another podcast. You need to stop running from your discipline, from your power, from the terrifying responsibility of being fully alive. Because the alternative, the comfortable death, is already creeping in. Every time you say, "I'll start tomorrow." Every time you break your word and pretend it doesn't matter. Every time you feel that fire in your chest and smother it with another excuse. Most men will die comfortably worthless. Not because they couldn't do more, but because they refused to. Because the quiet, forgettable life was just comfortable enough to keep them asleep. And when their time comes, they will look back not with rage, but with ache. The ache of knowing they had the chance to become something real, and they traded it for a seat in the bleachers, watching someone else live boldly.
And that's the part that haunts a man. Not the mistakes, not the heartbreak, not even the failures. What haunts him is the stillness, the realization that he played it safe for so long he can't even remember what danger felt like. He can't remember the last time he stood on an edge, unsure, alive, awake. Most men won't die screaming. They'll die settled, smiling at family photos, surrounded by people who never really knew them, whispering cliches like, "I did my best," while something inside them howls, "You never even started." Marcus Aurelius would not have pitied these men. He would have mourned them, quietly. He understood that the true tragedy of life is not death, but the refusal to live before it. And to live, truly live, means facing everything you've spent your life avoiding. It means choosing solitude when the crowd is louder. It means building discipline when pleasure is cheaper. It means cutting out the rot from your habits, your thoughts, your excuses, even if it leaves you bleeding for a while. You must break your comfort open like a prison door and walk out, barefoot, into the cold. That's what becoming a man actually means. Not dominance, not bravado, not a curated masculinity dripping with aesthetics and slogans, but this: to choose the hard path when the easy one whispers, to sit with your shame and not flee, to look in the mirror and not blink, to build a spine, not to control others, but to hold up your own soul when no one else will. And that kind of man, he doesn't ask for approval. He doesn't need to prove. He doesn't shout. He simply is. Rooted, calm, unshakable. You've been lied to, not just by culture, but by your own fears. You've been told that the goal is balance, harmony, peace. But there is no peace without war. The internal kind. The war of dragging your lazy instincts into the light. The war of denying your lesser impulses.
The war of doing what you promised long after the mood is gone. Every day you avoid that war, you become a little smaller, a little softer, a little less capable of standing when it matters. And here's the most brutal truth Marcus left us with. Nature doesn't care if you reach your potential. It doesn't care if you die full of music, unwritten books, unspoken truths. The universe is perfectly content letting you rot quietly. It is not your friend. It will let you eat, breathe, reproduce, and waste 80 years watching screens if that's what you choose. No lightning will strike, no divine voice will interrupt. It will just let you die with a full belly and an empty soul.
So if you're waiting for a sign, this is it. Not because I wrote it, because something in you just flinched. That part of you that remembers what it felt like to care about your life. That part of you buried beneath realism, beneath adulthood, beneath fear. You buried him so you could be accepted, so you could fit, so you wouldn't have to feel the sting of being misunderstood. But you don't need to be understood. You need to be true. There will come a day, maybe soon, maybe not for decades, when you will know that your time is up. You won't get to extend it. You won't get to revise it. And in that final hour, you'll meet the man you could have been. And he'll look you in the eye, not with hatred, not even with pity, but with quiet grief, because he'll know that you had everything you needed, and still you chose to be comfortable. Still, you chose to remain halfway. Still, you chose to exist instead of burn. Marcus wrote, "Do not act as if you were going to live 10,000 years. Death hangs over you. While you live, while it is in your power, be good." And that word good wasn't about morality. It was about essence, about fullness, about living in such a way that when the end comes, you are not found wanting. That you have said what needed to be said. That you have loved with clarity, fought with integrity, walked with depth. That you became someone who made the silence around him feel sacred, not hollow. This isn't about motivation. It's about memory. Remembering that your time here is short, that your presence matters, that what you choose today becomes your character tomorrow, that the man you are becoming is already forming through your smallest habits, your smallest compromises, your smallest justifications. And if you don't interrupt them, they will calcify, and they will bury you with a smile on your face and regret in your chest. Most men will die comfortably worthless, but not you. Not if you choose otherwise. Not if you stop apologizing for your fire. Not if you decide that mediocrity is not your birthright. Not if you finally stop trying to be understood and instead start becoming someone worth knowing. The kind of man who doesn't need to perform, doesn't need to impress, doesn't need to escape, because he has come home to himself. And if you do that, if you stay with it long enough, quiet enough, fiercely enough, then when death finally comes, you won't be afraid. You'll be ready, because you didn't waste your life being liked. You lived it being real.